Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're learning the weekly Torah portion, and we know that the Alter Rebbe taught us, that we are commanded to, that we are supposed to live with the times. What does it mean to live with the times? It means to live with the weekly Torah portion, not New York Times, but the Torah Times. To live with the weekly Torah portion, to be able to find within the weekly Torah portion the purpose, the direction, the inspiration, the answers to the questions that we seek. And this week's Torah portion is Parshas Noach. It's on page 40 and 41 in the blue Chumash that we're using today. And I'd just like to bring to your attention some fascinating verses in the opening of this week's Torah portion. When Noach was living in a very corrupt generation, do you know how you say corruption in Hebrew? Verse number 11. Verse number 11, it's on page 41. The world had become corrupt before God. The word corrupt in Hebrew is Hamas.
It's translated here as robbery.
Yeah.
It's
actually translated as corruption, but maybe they did it again. And then verse page 41, verse number 11, the world had become corrupt before God. And in addition, the land was filled with robbery. Now take a look at what happens in verse number 12. And God saw the land, and it was corrupt. Verse number 12. Had perverted each flesh, even animals had corrupted its way upon the earth. So God decided in verse number 13, this is very interesting, verse number 13, I'm going to translate the direct translation. And God says to Noach, the end of all flesh is coming before me because the land is filled with Hamas, because the land is filled with corruption, and therefore I'm destroying the earth. Right? Just an interesting perspective here, as we talk about rooting out evil in the promised land in Israel. Hamas, obviously, Israel is on a mission to end Hamas, to root out those terribly dangerous and evil people. Diabolical, yeah. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about today. Just a quick introduction to today's Torah learning. There's two tragedies that take place in this week's Torah portion. The first one is the more famous. The second one is the less famous. The first one is about the corruption of mankind in the majority of the week's Torah portion, which talks about, it was the 10 generations after Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Noah lived in a time when people were just very, very corrupt. They were just nasty to each other. But what happened was that God decides to actually end it all. Now, bear in mind, Noah was born in the year 1755. No, he died in 1755 BCE. Just to give you a perspective, BCE. 1755 BCE, right? That's when Noah died, which is 4,000 years ago. He was born in the year 2705 BCE. Now, in the Jewish calendar, he was born when 5783. It's 5784 right now in the Jewish calendar, 5784. Noah was born in the year 1056. So that's what, almost 4,000 years ago. That's when he was born, just to give you a perspective in the story. So Noah is living at a time when the world is corrupt and God decides to destroy the world. What was the sins of corruption that they were doing? It was robbery, it was stealing from each other. They were mean, they were nasty to each other, right? These people were evil to each other, right? And God decides to destroy the earth. Now,
even the animals were.
Even the animal, there was incest, there was cross. It was just horrible. Yeah. Now I'd like to draw your attention to a second tragedy that gets a lot less attention in the Torah portion, and that's on page 63, please. This one is talking about the Tower of Iraq, page 63. This interesting episode is the origin of all languages. The origin of all languages. Have you ever wondered where Latin comes from? You ever wondered about that? You do know? Oh, you do know. What do you say? Oh, good. Fine. You don't want to steal my thunder. Good. Okay. Thanks. So where do languages come from? How did it happen that people just started talking different languages? Like what? So God created the world in which language, Chuck?
It wasn't Chinese.
Hebrew. It's called the Holy Tongue. And God spoke and the world came into being. This is what we say in our morning prayers, right? In the morning prayers, Baruch She'amar ve'haya olam, we said every single morning, page 30, blessed is he who spoke and the world came into being. What was he speaking? Blessed is he who says and does. What was he speaking? He was speaking Hebrew. He said, let there be light, and there was light. This is the last Torah portion, the portion of Genesis. The world was created through a voice-activated interface, just like Siri or Alexa. Alexa, turn on the lights. The lights go on, right? Alexa, lower the air conditioner. The air conditioner goes down. Same thing. God says, let there be light, and the lights go on, right? So God created the world through Hebrew. The very letters of the Hebrew language, therefore, are the conduits of energy to each individual existence. The letters are the channels of energy, right? Through which that individual existence is sustained and maintained and recreated at every moment in time. Remember the doctrine of perpetual creation. Thus, your Hebrew name is so critically important. Your Hebrew name, as opposed to your English name, right? If your name is Justine or Mackenzie, that's very nice. But your Hebrew name is what matters. Yankel Zelig Ben Eliezer something Halevi, right? You think about such a name. Wow, that's a Hebrew name. Yankel Zelig. That's a Hebrew name. It's not just arbitrary. It's not just something which happens to be in the birth certificate, which the rabbi who passed 46 years ago would be the only one to remember. It's your actual channel of your energy, right? That's how the world was created in Hebrew. And for the first 1700 years, for 1700 years of the world, everyone spoke Hebrew. Where did it all change? How did suddenly people move to France and say, okay, now we're talking French? How did this happen? Right? Let's take a look. It's on page 63. Here's the story. What? The Tower of Iraq. Babel.
Babel means it's Iraq.
Well, Babel is Iraq. Persia is Iran. Babel is Iraq. Right? I want to arrange a community trip, actually, to visit the Tower of Babel in Iraq. Anybody joining?
Wait a couple of years.
Wouldn't that be lovely?
I guess the Sam was there.
We'll stay in the Four Seasons. Your son's been there on a different kind of tour, U.S. Army tour.
Not a good tour.
But we could stay in the Four Seasons, Baghdad. Would be awesome, right? Now, what happened was that Babel. What does Babylon mean? The word Babylon. Babel. What does Babel mean? You ever heard somebody babbling?
Yeah, my granddaughter babbled.
That is an
Makes no
English
sense.
word, and it comes from the Hebrew word. Babel comes from the Hebrew word Babylon. When somebody babbles, it comes from the Hebrew word babel. Has anybody ever accused you of being levalbel bamoach? Tafsik levalbel bamoach. Stop draining me a cup. Draining a cup is levalbel, to mess around with my brain. Stop it already. You know what I mean? Bilbul is a mess. Babel is a chaos, right? Babylon. This is the reason now. At the end of the flood, Babel was a valley. So all the residue of the great flood, you know what it looks like after a hurricane? You know what the street looks like after a hurricane? It's like, oh my God, I never knew we had so much debris in this neighborhood, right? So all the debris landed up in the valley in Babylon. So that's why it's called Babylon, because it was a mess. Not only was it a mess physically, but it was also a mess socially, because languages erupted from this place where people started talking nonsense. Here's the story. Okay. Page 63, verse number 1. Deliberately ignoring God's instructions to Noah that they disperse. This is after the flood. And populate the world. Noah's descendants chose to live together in the mountainous region around the Ararat Mountains. Ararat Mountains are still today in Iran. Actually, on the border of Iran and Turkey. Actually aware that God had brought on the flood because of the world's antisocial behavior. Remember, they were mean to each other, remember? They reasoned that the best way to garner God's favor and beneficence was to show him that they could live together in unity. The whole population of the world was united, speaking one language, but they were also united in a common, ill-advised cause led by Nimrod. Nimrod was a mean, nasty king. Nimrod means rebel, because he rebelled against God. He led the world in a rebellion against God. When they migrated from the mountains in the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar, large enough for their purposes, and they settled there. This is Babylon. Come there, but there were no stones in this valley with which to build. And they said to one another, come, let us mold bricks and fire them. The bricks they made were as hard as stone, and the clay served them as for mortar for which to plaster the walls. And what were they doing, building bricks for? Take a look. They said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top will reach into the sky. Let us make ourselves a name, so that we will not be scattered by God all over the face of the earth, and thereby lose the merit that earns us his beneficence. They realized that the sin of the generation of the flood was disunity, disharmony. So we will show harmony. We'll establish a city with a tall tower, like a monument that will keep us all together united. And thus we will have the merit of unity and God will not destroy us. They were actually correct. It was at this point that the Assyrians separate themselves from Nimrod and migrated to the north. The Assyrians, interesting. In the year 1996, God descended to see, this is from creation, God descended to see the city and the tower that the sons of man had built. Although he knew what they were doing, he wished to demonstrate that a judge should never pass sentence before thoroughly examining the case. Hear that, United Nations, right? You heard about the hospital in Gaza that they were condemning Israel for?
Yeah, sure.
But there was an attack in the hospital in Ashkelon. Doesn't matter.
Who cares?
Missiles land in the hospital in Ashkelon. Nobody cares. Barzilai Hospital. But a hospital in Gaza, oh my God, this is the end of the world, right? God said they possess all the advantages and conveniences of both being a single people, all having one language. And this is what they've begun to do. So now, should they not be prevented from doing all that they planned to do? It's very interesting.
Is this literal or this thing about God descending to see this?
That's literal in the verse.
Literal?
Literal, that's what it says.
I know it's what it says.
Vayered Hashem lirot et ha'ir. And God descended.
I got that. I don't see how it makes sense though.
That God went down?
Yeah, is this God a physical thing that goes down?
Okay,
or
so we've learned in
something
Tanya before that up and down is not spatial, but in terms of revelation. Higher and lower, it doesn't mean that God is that direction and not this direction. It means that God is more apparent, more perceived in heaven by the angels than God is perceived upon this earth. So God descended to Mount Sinai, for example,
revealed more.
and became revealed. They were like, oh, there's God. Zekeli v'anveyu, they said, this is my God, and I shall adore him on the Red Sea. Now I'm talking about, I moved to the Red Sea already, right? But at Mount Sinai, they were able to experience the divine revelation. So that means that God descended. Here too, God somehow became revealed in the lower plane. Okay, good question. Now, I just want to finish the story inside though, in order to demonstrate how a person should always humbly seek the counsel of others before deciding upon a course of action. It shouldn't be a court of one, even if they are of lesser status. He consulted with his heavenly court, saying, come, let us descend and confuse their speech there, so that one person will not understand another's speech. This is the punishment proposed to the generation of the Tower of Babel. They were getting a very different punishment to the people who, in the previous generation, the generation of the flood, they were killed. These guys were struck with the plague of Babel, talking different languages, right? Now, it's interesting. What was the punishment? What was their crime? What was their crime?
Hubris.
You'll see now. This will make them quarrel with one another and break up into separate groups. The very thing they feared would happen to them. Although they have declared war on me, and thus theologically the sin is greater than the sins of the generation of the flood, I will not destroy them, because at least they were united and acted peacefully towards one another. 62, middle of page 62. In contrast, the people of the flood were contentious and robbed from one another. I value peace amongst my creatures even more than I value the respect that they owe me. So it's interesting. You're looking at two generations of sinners. The first was generation of the sinners of the flood, and the second was generation of the Tower of Babel. The difference was like this. The first generation couldn't care less about God. They just hated each other. The second generation loved each other. They were united in their rebellion against God. The reason they built this tower, the oral Torah explains, is because they were trying to fight God in heaven. They were trying to build a tower somehow that was going to raise them up to fight God on his turf, so to speak. Fight. They were rebelling against God. They figured they were trying to prevent another flood from happening. So they said, we're going to fight God in his home turf. We're going to go up to the heavens. So you see the striking difference here, where they were either, first generation was fighting against each other, the second one was fighting against God. Which is worse? Would you prefer if your kids were fighting each other or fighting against you?
Fighting against you.
You would prefer that?
I'm not a parent, but I would think so. We will want harmony among my children.
You agree?
That's a hard.
Yeah.
That's a hard.
It's a tough question, but if you had to pick one,
I got both.
now both of them are nasty. But Both of them are nasty. But if you had to pick one, obviously you pick the latter. You'd rather the kids fight you than fight each other.
They're going to be together for 80 years.
You want them to be together. And that's why when it comes to the kids who are fighting each other, God kills them all. The first generation. But the second generation, the ones that were united, God doesn't kill them. He's like, look, I'm happy. I just told you to fight against me. So what did he do? He disbanded them through the plague of languages. Let's just finish the story here. The heavenly court agreed, except for Shem and his family. All of Noah's descendants suddenly forgot how to speak their language, Hebrew. Remember, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefet. Noah's 3 sons. These are the survivors of the flood. Noah and his wife, her name was Naamah, and their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefet, and their wives. 8 people. Now, only Shem maintained the Hebrew language. This is where Semites come from. Shemites, anti-Semites. Semites is from Shem, the son of Noah. We all come from Shem. Interestingly, by the way, so do the Arabs, by the way. So the Arabs also come from Shem. So it's just interesting.
And they don't speak Hebrew.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when you talk about anti-Semites, it's a little...
It's not right.
I think we should change the word to anti-Jew. It's called anti-Judaism. I don't know where this... Why we have to get historical over here when we talk about hatred? Why do we have to get into a history lesson? Just say anti-Jew. Just be clear, you know? Okay. Each clan began speaking its own language. Not being able to communicate with each other, they dispersed. In this way, God scattered them from that place all over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. The descendants of Yefet and Ham migrated westward, leaving the descendants of Shem in the regions east of the Euphrates River. Now, interesting. So, they're building this tower together, right? And what happens is the guy is asking for a hammer. Give me the hammer.
Yeah.
But the guy's like, he now in his newfound French, he thought that sounded like go take a break. So the guy was like, "What?" He took a break. He's like, "What happened to you?" And the guy doesn't understand what he's talking about. So he takes the hammer and he whacks him over the head. He's like, "What?" So they started fighting. They couldn't communicate. They literally couldn't communicate with each other. And that's why on page 65, it was therefore named Babel, because this is the place where God confused Balal, the whole world's language. From there, God dispersed them all over the face of the earth and revoked their privilege of entering the afterlife as well. And that is the end of the story. So with this, we conclude the 2 stories in the original text. And I want to bring to your attention a very interesting application of these 2 generations as it applies to our generation and the mission, the spiritual purpose of our generation. I'm going to turn your attention now to Ethics of the Fathers, which is part of the oral Torah. No, Tanya is part of the mystical Torah. Pirkei Avot is Ethics of the Fathers is part of the oral Torah. It says like this, page 286 in the blue letter, if you have it. It says like this. There were 10 generations from Adam to Noah. There were 10 generations from Adam to Noah. We know this, right?
Mhm.
To indicate how great is his patience. For all those generations repeatedly angered him until he brought upon them the waters of the flood. In other words, it took 10 generations before God lost it. Right? There were 10 generations from Noach to Abraham, Noach to Abraham. This is now forward. To indicate how great is his patience. For all those generations repeatedly angered God until Abraham, my father, came and received the reward for them all. Now that language is a little interesting. So there was 2 sets of 10 generations, until Noah and until Abraham, right? The first 10, God just indicated patience until he killed them all. But the second 10 generations, God indicated patience until Abraham collected the reward. Seeming to imply that the second set was worthy of reward, but they couldn't collect it. The first set wasn't even worthy of reward. There's no mention of reward. You see the difference, right? This is from the Mishnah. You got that? So the question is, why is it that when it comes to the first 10 generations, we don't speak of reward at all, just about God's patience? But the second 10 generations, we talk about God's patience, but somehow withholding the reward that was only able to be collected by Abraham. It's after we've introduced the way that I taught this Parsha so far that we can understand this Mishnah. The first 10 generations were the generation of the flood. The second 10 generations were the generation of the Tower of Babel. The difference being that the first set were socially evil. The second set were religiously evil. Make sense?
Religiously.
Fighting against God. The first set were fighting each other. robbery, murder, kidnap, incest, right? Evil to each other. The second set were good to each other. They were just religiously evil. So,
So you're saying, why did God reward Abraham?
right. And how is it that Abraham comes home to collect all the rewards, right? How does that work?
Well, because God is past, present, future. God knows what Abraham's going to do.
So we said like this, that for the generation of the flood, those who are socially corrupt, God has no patience for them. In the sense that there's no reward for these guys. There's no reward. There's nothing. There's no reward to even talk about. When you're evil to each other, forget about it. They lost their portion in this world. But interestingly, do they have a portion in the world to come? It seems like they don't, because there's no mention of reward. But when it comes to the generation of the Tower of Babel, they lost their reward in the world to come. Their sin was religious in nature, right? They were fighting against God. So they lost their heavenly reward. But what about their reward in this world? They had a reward in this world, but they simply couldn't collect it. We said, those last words of here, it says, they revoked their privilege of entering the afterlife as well, right? The generation of the tower lost their reward in the next world. But did they lose their reward in this world? No, they continue to live in this world. Right? So the message that the Rebbe derives from here is that the generation of the tower was unable to collect their reward in this world because they were channeling their efforts in an evil direction against God. So their reward was like pending. They just couldn't collect it until there came a righteous person like Abraham, and he was able to collect all the accumulating reward, which nobody previously was able to collect for the past 10 generations. Again, because they were worthy of reward. They were social sinners get no reward. But religious sinners, okay, you're fighting against God. There was still a social reward for them to collect, but they just couldn't collect it because they weren't worthy of collecting the distributions. Right? But the collection, the reward was accumulating. It was only when Abraham comes and he's a mensch that he was able to collect the reward for all those that came before him, right? And the way the Rebbe applies this is as well in our generation is like this. We are the last generation of the exile. Mashiach is coming in our lifetimes. And if I've ever felt the presence of the coming of Mashiach, it's right now. The world is shaking. The world is trembling. It's like the walls of the exile are on fire. You know, as we talk about the prospect of, God forbid, world war. There's incredible prophecies out there in the Torah. It says that just before the coming of the Mashiach, the king of Persia will rise up and attack the king of Aram. I don't know who the king of Aram is. But Persia is Iran. And then the king of Edom, which is Esau, will join the fray. Esau is typically Rome, Columbus, USA. Typically, right? That's how we understand it. So the US will get involved, and a great war will rage. This is from Yalkut Shimoni, from the Medrash, when I'm paraphrasing. The Medrash says that the great war will break out to the point that the Jews will be caught between a rock and a hard place. And we will not be able to discern friend from foe. We will not know who our friends are. Interesting, right? At that point, we will have no choice but to turn to Hashem. At which point, when the Jews finally turn to Hashem, with their backs against the wall, that the King Mashiach will rise up on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And he will declare the following words. I'll say them in Hebrew. Anovim, anovim, humble ones, humble ones. Higia zman geulaschem, the time of your redemption has arrived. Kol ma she'asisi le'asisi le'b'shvilchem, all that I've done only for your sake. This is a biblical prophecy. It's about 2,000 years old from the Medrash. And I think it's happening. So Mashiach is coming soon. And as that happens, we are the generation, the very, 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 very last generation before the coming of Mashiach. In a human being, the very bottom is the heel. We're called Dor de Ikvasadim Shicha, the generation of the heel of Mashiach. We're the very, very bottom of the totem pole. We're the very last ones, right? And what's our mission? Our mission is to prepare the world to the coming of the Mashiach. Our work is to take all those that came before us, like Abraham, who redeemed the generations that came before him. And he brought it all home by turning to Hashem. He was able to uplift and redeem all those that came before him to collect the merit of them all. We too need to realize that the previous generations rest upon our shoulders. They're waiting for us to behave like Abraham, to point our hearts in the right direction, so that when we, like Abraham, direct in the right direction, we cause our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, all the generations that came before us, to unleash the reward that's due to them. What's that reward? It's the coming of the Mashiach. On a practical level, what this means is, the Rebbe says, be like Abraham. What did Abraham do? We'll learn about it next week. Abraham's job was to reach out to every last human being, and he welcomed them and he taught them about God. Right? Vayikra Sham b'Shem Hashem Kol Olam, and over there he declared in the name of God, the Master of the universe. He taught the world monotheism. That's what he did. Right? He taught the world how to believe in one God. Do we need to do the same thing? How many of your friends will tell you, when you say that we are not occupying the land of Israel, if you say to your friends, let's say, we're occupying the land of Israel, right? It's like me occupying my home. My home, land of Israel. It's not the land of Arab. It's not the land of Gaza, right? You know the name Palestine. You know where the word Palestine comes from? Any student of history knows that the Romans were trying to add insult to injury after they conquered our temple in the year 69 CE. They were trying to rewrite history. So they took the name of Israel and they changed it to Palestina, because they were trying to say that this is the ancient Philistines. This is their land. The Jews never existed. They even changed the name of Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina. Aelia Capitolina. They changed the name, but that never stuck. They changed the name of Shechem, where Joseph is buried, to Nablus. That stuck, right? But the name Palestine stuck. It's a Roman revision of history, right? Yeah. So when we come out and we say that this is our land, how do we know? Because God gave us the Torah. How many of your friends will tell you you're a religious fanatic? You can't say that. You're a religious fanatic. We need to be the monotheists of our generation. We need to teach the world that there was an Israel before the United Nations vote in 1948. We need to teach the world that this is our land because God gave it to us. How do I know that? Because it's in the Torah, in the most printed, popular book in the history of the world. We need to be like Abraham, the monotheist teachers of society, because then Abraham was talking to a culture that also knew about God. They just refused to believe in him. We too are living in a generation that knows about God, but just refuses to believe in him because of the insecurity and the lack of self-esteem that they carry. Everyone's so afraid of what other people are going to say. By the way, the Gentiles, they believe in God. The Gentiles have a tremendous belief in God. 80 million evangelical Christians. When we tell our Gentile friends that it's our land, they're like, of course it's your land. Like obviously it's your land. That's what it says in the Bible. Did you read the Bible? Right? Well, it's only our fellow Jews. Those are the ones that are struggling. We, like Abraham, need to be the monotheists. We need to bring it home fearlessly. And you'll notice in our calendar, which you'll hopefully receive in the mail any day now, the front cover of the calendar is fearless faith. Fearless faith. This is the mission of our theme this year. It's fearless faith. It's being able to go out there fearlessly, like Abraham, not being afraid, with the courage of our convictions and saying, yes, I believe. Because if you think, my fellow Jew, if you think that we survived the tests of time for any other reason other than God, then you're delusional. We have to believe in it. And when we do that, what we're doing, just like Abraham did in this Mishnah, Abraham was collecting or unleashing, he was opening the dam wall, right? Allowing all that pent-up, accumulated merit to flow into Abraham. When we are like Abraham in our generation today, then we allow all the past 2,000 years of Jewish persecution and struggle and struggle with faith and struggle with Torah and mitzvahs to bring it home. And as we do that, we will release the dam wall, allowing that water to flow with the ultimate reward that the entire world has been waiting for. Even Hamas is waiting for us to bring Mashiach, because then they too will be turned around as they see, even the terrorist will see, why am I shooting a missile at a fellow human being who's created the image of God? Why would I want to do this? These guys believe in God, it's just a little misguided. They're in the reverse gear, which got to change gears for these terrorists, right? What we need to do is by bringing Mashiach consciousness to the world, that's when Hamas will truly disappear. The hatred of Hamas will disappear and be turned into passionate fighting for God, not against God, for mankind instead of against mankind. The world is waiting for us to rise to fulfill our role. The time has come. You are not incapable of making a difference. Because when you lay tefillin, when you do that mitzvah, when you talk to your kids and you say, no, I'm not a religious fanatic. I'm actually normal. And you say that with a straight face. And you talk like I mentioned. You say, listen, you're being irrational to think that the Jews survived, outlived every other enemy for no apparent reason. You're being irrational. You have to say that there is a God. Of course there's a God. What about the Holocaust? Talk to my rabbi, okay? You have a problem with that? You have questions? We'll do religious family therapy with the rabbi. But that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about belief, about faith in God. Okay, so you don't agree with everything God does? Fine. I don't agree with everything you do either, right? Right? It's okay. I still acknowledge your existence, even though I don't agree with everything that you do. I might not like your shirt today, but I still acknowledge your existence, right? No offense, right? That's the bottom line. We need to be like Abraham. And when we do that, when we can reach out to every single Jew with love, not with condescension, not with a judgmental, critical approach, but with love, and saying, I know that you're a traumatized Jew. I know that you have within you 2,000 years of collective trauma. But I'm going to put my arm over you and say, let's do a mitzvah together. Let's come home. If you could be like Abraham. You know what Abraham did? He fed his people. He fed them food and drink. He invited them to his Shabbos dinner table, right? He made kiddush with them. He had a drink with them, and he loved them. And he saw himself as an emissary of God. He didn't think of himself as just a civilian. He was a general in the army of God, and you are too. Wherever you live, amongst your peers and your friends, you can and you must make a difference. When we're like Abraham, that is what's going to unleash all the pent-up blessing. That's what's going to bring Mashiach. Any questions?
About the border.
The border.
Gaza
Which border?
Was the land of the Philistines in the days of Judges. Did we ever?
The Philistines. You just spoke about the Philistines.
No. The question is that really what God gave the children of Israel, including Gaza, or is Gaza stuff that was just outside of what
the land of Israel is from the Mediterranean till the Euphrates.
Yeah. But,
We got to tell that to Iran and Iraq. I'm not sure how well it's going to go over at the UN.
oh, the UN?
Yeah. I'm sure they'll like that one, but yeah.
So
Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Iran.
The short answer then is we don't really know the specifics.
I do think it includes Gaza. I think it includes potentially even the Sinai Desert, most of Saudi Arabia and Jordan as well, like all of the Middle East almost. But I'm not. Look, it says that from the river Jordan until the Mediterranean is the land that we will get until Mashiach comes. But when Mashiach comes, that's when we're going to get the Trans-Jordan, which is east of the Jordan until the Euphrates. Right? That's going to be interesting. Either way, we got to stand up with fearless faith, folks. Be like Abraham. L'chaim.